What can we know about the life of an ordinary nun in medieval Europe? In movies and books, for example, you can get very interesting and sometimes spicy information. This does not compare to archival data, which can be believed a little more than the movie. Scientists who with special interest studied the period of the Middle Ages in Europe found in the archives of the University of York entertaining information. The nun was tired of living by strict rules. She was fed up with the constant prohibitions. The body longed to fulfill physiological needs, not to sit in a dark and often damp cell. In the Middle Ages, it wasn't the best conditions to live in a monastery. The serpent tempter so beckoned the girl that she faked her own serious illness and then pretended to be dead, all in order to leave the walls of the cloister and indulge in real pleasures. And before we find out how she managed to do it, and what the nuns in medieval Europe who itched in one place, subscribe to the channel and give a like to this video. It helps the channel. I will be grateful. Scientists found a note in the archives. It was written in Latin and stored in the business papers of the Archbishop of York. The case took place at the turn of the 13th century. Warn Jean of Lyde, who until recently was a nun of the monastery of St. Clement's in York, it is her duty to return to her home, was what was written in the note dated 1318 by Archbishop William Melton. By the word was meant the convent from which the nun had fled without regard or regret. No exact instructions or escape plan has been discovered. How did Jean manage to deceive the nuns? One popular theory is that she used some kind of ointment that caused redness and irritation of the skin, subsequently appearing bubbles that burst and from them oozed liquid. At the sight of this, especially in medieval times, everyone would think that a person was seriously ill. But there were witnesses to the funeral, so who was buried in her place? Most likely a rag doll was made, stuffed with straw and clay, wrapped in sheets, and passed off as a dead body. Of course, she had accomplices. It's hard to pull this off alone. Imagine the lengths a girl would go to escape from a convent. Jean was clearly desperate. It was a hardship for her to live in that convent. People were talking about the forbidden fruit. But the more you forbid, the more you want, especially when it comes to physiological processes, such as the continuation of birth. Nature demanded its own. Nuns often did vulgarities with men who visited the convent. They could be tradesmen, laborers, or simply travelers who were looking for a place to sleep for money. There are legends of the real houses of tolerance that were in the monasteries in those days. Jean was not lucky. Her convent was decent and had strict rules. The idea of imitating her own funeral did not occur to her immediately. At first, she was simply overwhelmed by thoughts. She looked for like-minded people among the nuns and found friends in misfortune. Conversations began about natural processes, which were forbidden to be practiced within the walls of the convent. Nuns, for lack of candidates, could commit a sin together. They simply went to bed together in their clothes and did not extinguish the candle so that no one would not think too much. They communicated on these topics secretly and often in whispers. There were enough extra ears in the walls of the monastery. One day in the walls of the monastery, namely in the food storage, Jeanne saw a man. Asking her friend why there were strangers here, she was told that the monastery did not produce all the food itself and had to buy something from local farmers. Immediately there were dirty thoughts, and in parallel with them, prohibitions that it is absolutely forbidden to do so. Not thinking long, Jeanne ran to the farmer, bringing her friend for a support group. Not knowing what to do with a live man and how to find an approach to him, she had to improvise and decided not to throw off her clothes and insert something there. There was no experience, but it was literally on the rush. She decided to taste the farmer's lollipop. The man, of course, bewildered, but clearly was not against such a turn. After the process itself, Jeanne wasn't exactly pleased. A friend was shocked by her behavior. She was a witness to Jeanne's sinful fall. After this incident, the girl constantly thought about it, and she clearly liked these thoughts more than obedience and hours of prayer. It was impossible to leave the monastery just like that. It could happen in rare and extreme cases. A superior could authorize Jean to leave the walls of the monastery and start a normal life. This way was not suitable for her. It was hard to escape from the convent, and if caught, there could be trouble. Jean consulted her friend, who had knowledge of healing ointments. She suggested that she use a homemade ointment on her skin, but warned her that in high concentration it would cause skin burns and would look like a disease. The plan was that because of her illness, Jean would be allowed to leave the walls of the convent to see her family. But it was not to be. The abbess offered to treat her within the walls of the monastery and not to leave the holy monastery. Jean was in despair. The call of the flesh called her stronger, and she finally decided that she did not want to sit in prison all her life. The plan was finalized. A friend warned Jean not to abuse this ointment, as it could leave her with deep scars on her skin. Jean shared her idea. She offered to fake her own death and asked her friend for help. Not to say that the friend was delighted, but she did not want to sit in four walls, especially when Jean promised to get her out. I don't know whether she was lying or telling the truth, but there was no evidence of anyone else escaping from the convent in the archives. Jean began to pretend she was getting worse. She waited a whole month before pretending to be dead. The abbess believed it, and it was decided to bury Jeanne as soon as possible. A doll stuffed with straw and clay was prepared in advance, and the fact that the body was wrapped in a sheet and no one saw Jeanne during the burial is easily explained. Her fictitious disease was unknown, and in order that the other prioresses would not be infected, it was decided to wrap the body better. One friend was clearly not enough for this plan. Most likely the farmer from whom Jean had lit a cigar had smuggled her out with food. In the very note, which was found in the archives, it was said that the nun Jeanne, or Joanna, living in a convent, imitated her illness, then pretended to be dead and played out her funeral with accomplices. The specific people are not reported. It was also said there that she misled the devoted sisters of the monastery. The most insidious thing, according to the priest, was that a rag doll was buried as a nun. All this happened in a sacred place among the true ministers of the church. Indeed, the act is extremely audacious for those times. The archival document stated that after her secret escape, Jean embarked on the path of carnal lust and dwells in freedom. She's not afraid for her sinful soul and gives herself to the comforts. Do not know how the priest knew such details of the intimate life of the escaped nun. One thing is clear, Jean got what she wanted. Nature has taken its toll, and once tasted the forbidden fruit in the form of a farmer's lollipop, let herself go to all lengths. However, there is another opinion that she ran away just with the same farmer, and they moved away from that area, starting a life of spouses. How did the abbots of the monastery find out about it? Perhaps a friend of Jean's who was waiting for her to help her escape, or some other unnamed accomplice was tortured by conscience. History is silent as to what happened afterwards. Among the nuns of medieval England, those who were truly religious and willing to devote themselves to the service of the convent were very few. In those days, there was a shortage of men in England, and the convent was a refuge and comfort for those who did not find their happiness. There was another side. Medicine was extremely poorly developed, and many births ended in the death of the mother. Girls were afraid of such an outcome, and to avoid the sad consequences, escaped from the worldly in the monasteries. But nature caught up with them there too, itching so much that they had no strength to endure. Subscribe to the channel, put likes, and share your opinion in the comments. See you soon!